Hello, hi, welcome back to the podcast. I am Ashley, and this is Divine Dingo. Ba-da-ba-boom, ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. Don't worry, this episode is way better and eons more interesting than that last few moments of the intro. Don't be fooled by this intro, or any of my intros really, because the episode is probably better than the intro. In this case, 100%, 1,000% better than the intro. I am, I just finished editing this episode, which I barely edited at all. Sometimes I go through and I take out all the ums and uhs because I want to sound smarter than I actually sound in real life, but I just am less interested in polishing myself for your listening pleasure. So sorry. I mean, look, I say and a lot when I'm deep in thought. Nobody cares as much as I do, so I'm pretty much just yelling at myself right now. Okay, I'm getting off track, per usual. This interview is maybe my favorite one to date, and I say that I think after every interview I do, but this one is seriously, I cherish this conversation that I had with my guest today. My guest today is Kate Ray. I'll just get that out of the way. Let me get the most important part of this intro out of the way so I can continue to just talk about myself. Classic Ashley. I have been thinking a lot about everything. I don't know. I'm like losing my fucking mind just thinking about all the possibilities of consciousness and energy and looking at the paranormal in I would say in a completely new way, but in all honesty, it's the only way that I've ever looked at it. Well, I mean, I guess I just used to look at it as absolutely terrifying because Hollywood kind of took the reins on my imagination and told me at a young age what the paranormal is and what it's not. And so, as a person who's lived a lot of their life in fear of the unknown, talking to people like Kate about the endless possibilities of what our perception can do, what our consciousness can do, and what connecting with other energies can be like, what that experience can teach us. And this conversation, it's a long one. It's like an hour and a half. If I can make this intro short, we're definitely going to keep it under an hour 45. But it's just, I could have talked to Kate forever, in all honesty. And I'd probably say that about a lot of my guests because I do love most of every one of my guests. I guess you'll never know which one I don't love because I did say most and not all. Wink, wink. I'm just so, I just finished editing it and I'm just like right back in that place where I was when I initially sat down to talk with Kate. It was one of the easiest conversations I've ever had. If you can get past how often I am just stumbling over my words because I'm putting a bridge between two separate ideas together in this conversation multiple times. So, Kate is a paranormal investigator. She's an artist. She's a writer. She's a Reiki practitioner. She's a magical herb practitioner, which I'm kicking myself for not asking her about because I wrote that down in my notes to ask her about. So that's why I'm going to have her on the podcast again. There are endless thoughts running around in my mind that I am like eager to share with Kate and to get her opinion and get her perspective on it. And I'm just really grateful and also humbled to have somebody to bounce these fucking strange ideas off the dome with. And just not only to just like have a person accept what I'm saying and not think it's fucking weird, but then have their own ideas. And I don't know. I mean, Kate's been in this realm of the weird, if you will, for a much longer time than I have been. And it's just really nice to sit down with a person and just get giddy about the paranormal and about consciousness and, like I said earlier, just all the things. So I'm gonna stop talking because this episode is amazing and you should give this interview all of your attention. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but you should pay attention to this episode. Okay. I love you all and I love Kate. So please welcome Kate Ray. So I guess I just want to dive right into it with your definition of what it means to be a faeryologist and how that kind of relates to your work as a paranormal investigator.
Okay, so the faeryologist bit, I kind of refrain from calling myself that as much as possible because it gives me a grandioso title. I think a faeryologist for me is somebody who looks outside of folklore, if you like. So a lot of faeryologists are people who are fairy experiencers. They are people who have encountered fairies and want to know more. So my journey kind of with the paranormal started only a few years ago, but my journey with the fairies, it's always been there. What happened was I'm a paranormal investigator with quite a well-known team here in the UK, and we were coming across non-human entities on paranormal investigations, and they weren't in the demonic realm. It wasn't quite like that. So people were struggling to kind of categorize them. And I do remote viewing as part of paranormal investigation. Before I go to a location, I'll open myself up, have a wander around, check out who's there, just give us a preempt of what's happening. And time again, I was coming across these non-human entities, these creatures. I knew them instantly to be fae. And that's kind of where I'm at. I then sort of have fallen into the realms of the fairy lady within the ghost world. I'm not quite. I've always said I'm not quite happy with the whole fairy lady aspect of it, but and that's where I'm at. That's where I got to.
And so you were talking about like your connection to the fae has always been there. So that kind of started as like maybe a child. Then you started having, because that's how kind of it started for me, but I didn't realize that that's what it was until I was like, I'm 27 now, until I started looking into it. And I was like, oh, I think that I was like, I knew that I was talking to like woodland spirits, or, you know, it was always like small animals or little insects or the way that the wind would blow. And I always felt like I could talk to the trees and things like that at a really young age. So is that kind of how it started for you too when you were younger?
Yeah, definitely. My back garden. So I would come out of my house, go down the street, and I've got Sherwood Forest. So that's quite a famous place, Robin Hood and all that. So spending time in the forest was an everyday occurrence. It was something, you know, you immerse yourself in it as a kid, especially if it becomes part of your play, part of your routine growing up. And like you, I had no idea that it wasn't abnormal to have that kind of connection. I think the difference for me, and it's kind of led to where I am now, I always had the understanding that what I was dealing with wasn't unicorns, bubbles and glitter. You know, it wasn't that side of the fae realm. It was this much more earthy, nature driven sort of energy that was around, and it was sometimes it could be and can be quite a frightening experience. It's not always a pleasant interaction. I suppose it's like, you know, going around a safari park. You're not always going to get pleasant interactions with wild animals, you know, because they're not there to entertain you. You know, like the fae aren't here to entertain us as humans. They're not there to present themselves as Disney characters. they have purpose, and they are wild things. They are the epitome of the essence of wild things.
When you were saying that, it's like my mind, and I had to write it down. It's like you're meeting them in their element. And
Yeah.
so you're out of your element. I guess, we've been conditioned as humans in a modern time. We live in houses, we sleep on beds, we have technology. And so that has become more or less our day-to-day element. And when you're out in the forest, even as a child, who may not be as conditioned to, technology and things like that, you're still stepping out of your element. And I think about people that have tried to connect with animals on a level that's almost disrespectful, where they believe that they can just come in totally human with all of their conditioning and programming and their day-to-day life and be accepted by like a pack of wolves or, a group of bears or something like that. And it to me, when I was younger, I kind of fantasized about that, like wanting to have that experience, like, oh, I'm just going to run off into the woods and just be accepted by the animals. And now that I'm older and I kind of look into different accounts of people doing that, like I said, it feels disrespectful because at times, then you get attacked by a wolf, a bear eats you, something like that, something happens, and it's not usually in the animal's character to act so aggressive towards humans, but you come in and yeah, you're just almost like you're pushing your limits. There's that level of respect that is just gone. Yeah, so I'm kind of
Yeah.
rambling, but it almost feels that way with like, is that kind of like what you're saying? Like it can be kind of a frightening experience with the Fae, or is it because it's like you're just totally not conditioned to perceive them in the way that they're presenting themselves, and so it's kind of frightening because you don't have something to relate it to.
I think part of it is it boils down to that we are the only creature on the planet that has ego. And when we go into these settings, we go with our ego. And it is that almost, like you say, going in with the wild bears and wolves, we have this kind of ego driven thing that we have a superiority that keeps us safe within that environment. And I think that when you're dealing with the wild and you're dealing with nature spirits or the fae, they're not ego driven. They are driven as wild animals are driven. So trying to preempt them, you can to a certain degree. And I think people, when they do go into a fae environment, they expect it to be magical in a sort of a preconceived idea of what magical is. We've all grown up with fairy tales, and the fairy tales that we've grown up with, they're misleading because true fairy tales, and when we look at the origins of fairy tales, encounters that people have on the whole of fae, historical encounters as well as folklore encounters, are bloody frightening. People get whisked away, people get enchanted, people get poisoned, people get elf shot with arrows and they end up paralyzed. These aren't pretty stories, but bizarrely enough, in the last sort of, I would say 50 to 60 years, the stories have got so pretty that we're almost so disconnected from the idea of what fae is that it becomes even more dangerous. It's like going into that pack of wolves and putting your hand out and saying, come here, boy, and then getting your
Mhm.
hand bitten off, because we expect this beauty back, that we've been conditioned to think, and actually, we don't know what their parameters and boundaries are.
What do you think is the reason for like the change of narrative? Because in some of the research that I've done, there's so many different like manifestations of Fae and Fae energy from medieval times to the early 20th century, and it's never been, from what I've seen, it's never been like pink and magic and flying little fairies with like insect like wings and things like that, and that almost seems like a newer, like you said, in the last 50 or 60 years. So do you have an idea as to like maybe why we've strayed from that
Oh
original
yeah.
narrative?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the easy explanation is that grew up with the Industrial Revolution. So the more we became disconnected with nature as a whole, because we had machinery and industry, and we weren't working out in the fields, we weren't working out in the forests. The further we came away from that, the more it gave it scope, because we weren't dealing with it. The more it had scope to become something that was fantasized, if you like. So we put this fantastical element of it. onto it. And with that, you've got the printing press. So, books were being churned out, paintings were being churned out en masse. People had access to literature and art. And this kind of access would have grown into things like children's stories being sort of a bastardization of sort of the true fairy tales. And it was almost like starting off as a moralistic chapter to teach kids, how to morally be, and then from there we have more scope for it to be a more enchanting and fantastical realm to be in. But it's been in history. This last sort of from the Industrial Revolution has been the biggest changes within fairyology, within folklore ever. Everything else has been quite a sinuous ebb and flow through history of how the subtleties have changed, and then all of a sudden, bang, we've got this explosion of nicer ideas about the fairies. You've got the Cottingley fairy story, which is a famous British story. Which again changed our ideas, and sapped in some very important people in this country into believing in fairies. And that kind of bloomed again another interest within the fays being these little winged Tinkerbelly things. So there's lots of elements, but I would say definitely the Industrial Revolution, the disconnection with nature has been the biggest thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because the disconnection from nature and just only having stories from the past to work on, you're kind of just left to your imagination in your home, and to build up like what it would be to be a fairy and what it would be like to be like a woodland creature or something. And then I think I've talked about this on a past podcast, the like movies, growing up with movies and TV shows, and how they like give animals these features that are almost like a child baby. And so then you like children grow up with like this illusion of like over friendliness of common wild animals. And so then like they might have a negative interaction with an animal where one might like bite it or scratch the child or something, and then like that animal is killed, and then it's just like this further disconnect from like the reality of animals being wild beings, and it's not saying, and I hear a lot of talk of like wild beings and that being like lesser than humans, but it's like I think that comes from a human centric view of the world. And I think that, like you're saying with the fae, like turning the fae into these sparkly pink, mostly female versions of themselves, in stories. And when you're talking, it almost, I was thinking too of Industrial Revolution, and then like when Christianity took over too, and then it was like, no, there is like one view, there is one God, and then everything else just kind of like falls to the side of that one belief. And I was even reading like I think it was probably around the time that Christianity, I don't know my years and like time periods, but when Christianity was really coming in, they were looking at fae as not fallen angels, but basically beings that were like too good for hell, but not good enough for heaven, and just kind of like hung out in like that liminal space. And there's so many different like ideas of what the fae are. I mean, you were saying earlier about like having like arrows shot at them and things like that. Well, I was thinking about how in different parts of the world and in different cultures, people think that they are like almost human ghosts of tribal people. And so then it's like you have people that believe that fae are like almost like past human ghosts or something. They didn't use the word ghost, but it was insinuating like spirits of past humans, so that fae are very human. And then you have like another time period in another part of the world that believes that fae are just another intelligent being that is living in this reality with us, that is not physical and not human, completely separate from human. So it's like there's so many different like examples or ideas of what the fae is. And that is just like I wanted to read a definition from this John Michael Greer book, and it was talking about, let me flip to it. It says that the word fairy comes, like the Latin word that it derives from is called fatare, Fatare. I can't speak Latin. I'm assuming.
It's the fates. Yeah.
Okay. And that definition of fatare is a state, condition, or realm of enchantment. And then they defined fae as an enchanted or enchanting being. And I feel like that's such a broad definition. It can be anything from, when you're on an investigation and a paranormal, and it can be a fae if it's an enchanted or enchanting being, right? And it can relate to animals, it can relate to a feeling you get when you meet a person. It's just such a broad
Mhm.
definition. And I don't know if I have a question, but do you have any thoughts about anything that I just said?
I think it's interesting because of there is so many avenues that you can go down when you're looking at the fae. And if you do, I say non-human entity because
Mhm.
that kind of encompasses all the ideologies that go around them. And the whole idea where Christianity took them on board. And one of the other things that Christianity thought that they may be is the spirits of unbaptized children. So
Mhm.
you can see that there's a relationship saying that actually the Fae aren't good because these are unbaptized children that haven't gone to heaven. So they're mischievous and they'll get into trouble. You've
Mhm.
also got the elements of, people do believe that the interdimensional beings just as much on a similar plane that we understand, ufology and alien connections that we have. And you're right, there are theories that these are the essence or the spirits of people who were deeply connected with nature and who have left part of their fragmented soul on the planet to be able to carry on some kind of work within nature. So the possibilities are endless, and you to bring them all together is quite a big feat to do. But
Mhm.
you can start looking at them in terms of all those things are right. All those energies are right, and all those aspects are right. And it's not until we see this broader picture. When you're talking about the Fae, we're not. When people say Fae or fairy, they expect the Tinkerbell.
Mhm.
This is a vast realm of beings. This is a huge realm of beings, and this rainbow goes from, the dark, what we would consider the dark and the malevolent, right the way through to the light bearing benevolence. And there's every single variation of creature within that realm. So I don't think any of it is particularly wrong. It's just looking how it weaves through, and how all these ideas sort of marry up into the tapestry into what they are.
When I was reading about the Fae and reading about exactly what you're talking about now, how there's so many different ideas and manifestations of what they are. To me, it was like it's all just one energy that's just manifesting in different forms. And then
Mhm.
I was thinking about too, like paranormal phenomena, or just when people, think that their grandma is speaking to them and they have a vision of God, and when they talk to an animal, or just any kind of like psychic, intuitive, sensitive kind of phenomena, it does all just feel like it's so connected. And so
Mhm.
trying to tie down and define what fae is kind of just seems like a waste of time and like a
Yeah.
misdirect, right? And I feel like it's almost, the idea is opening up to the possibility that they are everything and that they are everywhere, and then that is kind of where you find yourself, is when you let go of just trying to, it's such a human quality, or at least one, like, that I'm familiar with, is like figure out what it is, define it, put it into
Mhm.
text. This is what it is, and then it's just that, and then it lives in this box. But I just feel like the essence of Fae will never be put into a box. It
Mhm.
cannot be confined. And I was thinking too about like, okay, so are they, a physical being? Are they interdimensional being? Are they from the earth? Are they from another place and come to the earth? And then I was also thinking about that with animal spirits, and then also just with human consciousness, and how we are all connected to the earth but not contained to the earth. And
Mhm.
I was thinking about that with the fae and animals. And because when I communicate with animals, so I think back to Native American traditions when they talk about animal spirits, and they talk about animal spirits as like them being on the earth, at least from
Mhm.
my interpretation. And their characteristics and their spirit almost feels like how the animal looks physically. Bear
Mhm.
spirit is big and brave, and the snake can find, little places and slither around like a slithering energy. But when I meet animal spirits, they are just like this pure form of energy, and they're just really fluid, and they're almost like shape shifting.
Mhm.
They'll present themselves to me as like just maybe free flowing energy, and then they'll present themselves to me as the dog that they are, and then they'll present themselves to me as a winged creature. And it's all like the one animal consciousness I'm trying to communicate with. And I have always, I guess, once I knew what shapeshifter was, and I kind of dived into that or dove into that definition, and it started to resonate with me. I kind of started to feel from the outside world that shapeshifter was a bad thing or like a negative thing. But I
Mhm.
was also reading that shapeshifting and fae go hand in hand, and it's all just kind of like these things are all lining up within myself, within my inner world. It's like, oh, I feel like I'm a shapeshifter. I feel like the animal consciousness I communicate with are all shapeshifters. I heard that fae can actually like shapeshift into animals, into like woodland creatures. And so it's just kind of like my mind is like totally blown. All this information just makes me feel so much more connected to the idea of fae, that it cannot be contained, and it is essentially all things.
Mhm. Definitely. I mean, again, it comes back to that human ego where we have to define and put things into boxes. We have to categorize things because if we categorize it, then we feel as though we own it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it's a thing that once you blast those boxes open, you get much more of a sense of what things are. Definitely.
It is such a gift to get to a point where you have so much information you feel like you can't go any further, and then it is humbling to just be like, oh, maybe it's all the things, maybe I am all the things. Because I guess just my avatar of Ashley, she's into like musical theater, paranormal phenomena, animal rescue, like I don't know, painting. Like I feel like I'm just like all over the place. I'm
Mhm.
into like construction and like nature, like land conservation, and just like I'm all the things. And I remember when I was younger, just trying to like, what are you?
Mhm.
Figure out what you are, and then move forward. But I love like just not even I would say working with the energy of the Fae, just embracing it, just learning about it, just thinking about it opens me up also just in on a personal level. Just like, oh, maybe like they're all the things and I'm all the things and animals are all the things and it's all connected. And I've had several small experiences when I'm kind of, because I live in the Pacific Northwest.
Mhm.
And when I'm just like walking around, there's one trail in particular in town where I feel like there are so many portals to other worlds. Like when I'm walking on that trail at a certain stretch of the trail when it's dusk, I feel myself entering and exiting these portals. And it's unlike anything I can have explain, that without kind of sounding crazy to a certain person.
Mhm.
But on that trail, I have heard like almost like walking past a tree stump and a hearing like an echo inside the tree stump. And it's like the tree is hollow, but I know that it's not hollow. And it catches me off guard because I'm not one in my life to like kind of hear maybe things from other worlds or have these kind of experience. It's like new to me. So I'm almost like, okay, is there a mountain lion somewhere? Because that's the only, my rational mind is like, nothing, what made that sound?
Mhm.
And on that same trail, there have been times where I just like, I don't know, I just happen to be like looking at my palms for some reason, and like a tiny little leaf will come and land like right in the center of my palm. Or I'll just like see something out of the corner of my eye. And I think it's more like a tree branch drops or like right next to me, or a tiny little leaf lands into my palm. That's when I feel like I am actually being communicated with by the woodland spirits that I might consider
Mhm.
to be fae. And when I come across like a little bug or something, like anytime I see like a little insect that, I just recently there was a little moth and it kind of looked like it was trying to fly, but it was on the ground. And so I kind of just picked it up in my hand and I let it dry off and then it flew away. But it's moments like that where that's just my instinct. And then
Mhm.
I feel like once I'm like out of that moment, I feel like I have a bunch of eyes on me.
Mhm.
And it is like it feels to me from what I know about the Fae. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. You will get that sense of being watched, and you will get that sense of when you do something that's above and beyond human interaction. You're becoming immersed in your environment. They do prick up. They do sort of. They're curious. They are curious. I suppose because so many of us in everyday life we walk around in these bubbles and we walk around in the bubble of our head. So we're contained in our thoughts. We're constantly thinking about doing the shopping, doing the washing, work, etc., etc., that we forget to really observe, with all our senses, the environments that we're in. And when you start doing that, it's I had an interview, a chat just after Christmas, and the way I explained it is, with the lockdown that's happening in this country, as all over the world, over the last few months, my foraging has gone through the roof. So going out into the woods and foraging has absolutely gone through the roof, and I've had some amazing experiences. But one of the analogies that I like to put to is, so I didn't really understand mushroom language, if you like. And I have been in woods all my life. And this year, because I made it a specific that I was going to go into the woods for mushrooms, and I was looking at seasons when they were growing and where they like to grow, and conditions, etc. I have never seen so many bloody mushrooms in all my life, and it's like, how the hell have I been through woods and not tripped over these things? And I used that analogy in the same sense as searching for fae. When you start tuning into an energy, when you make it a possibility that these things you are going to encounter, you will start finding them. And it starts off with the subtleties of feeling like you're being watched, or having branches fall in front of you, aren't quite a natural occurrence, or the leaf falling on your hand. It is those, and it's kind of them checking you out and saying, have you noticed this? Are you observing this? And the more you kind of elevate to them and say, I can see you, I know you're there. And one of the strangest things that's been a recent thing probably over the last 3 years, and I didn't know that it was fae related. I actually thought I was going a bit nuts. I'll be walking through the woods, usually with somebody else, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I would get this drone, like a hive of bees had been dispersed somewhere, and it felt like it was just above my head, a couple of meters above my head, and it was so loud, so loud. And I would say to whoever I was with, "Can you hear that? Can you hear Can you hear the bees?" And they're like, can't hear anything. Absolutely couldn't hear anything. And the first time it happened, I was like, seriously, you can't hear that, come on. And the second time, then the third time, and I can't remember what the book was called, but it's quite a prestigious one. Marjorie, it'll come to me, and I'll let you know for a link. But it's about it was a collation of real fairy encounters, and one of them was this buzzing sound. And she explains it, then she goes into depth after this encounter, and I was like, thank God. Thank God I'm not going mad. This is, so they will present themselves in ways that you could brush off as nature. You could brush off as just a natural, or a slightly odd natural phenomena. But it is that, how observant are you? Are you really tuning into your surroundings? Have you got the eyes and the senses and the heart open to be able to have these experiences? And once you do, it can blow wide open. It really can. And then they start playing around with you.
Yeah, because they can be like kind of mischievous and
Hugely.
yeah. I have felt that energy, like when I first started noticing on that one trail I'm talking about in town. I felt it, and I felt like I was going through like different realms and different worlds, and I was alone, and it was dusk, and I was kind of like a little bit nervous. And I've heard people say like, well, if you're going to think about the fae, like maybe don't think about them for the first time when you're in the woods or something like that, and all of this stuff. And I just, like, I've always dealt with so much fear in my life that a part of me is like, oh, like not overly confident to the fact that to almost me being ignorant, but I'm just like, no, like I know that nothing outside of me can harm me. I know that I'm an autonomous being, and like just kind of like owning that sovereignty in that moment. Obviously I was like scared for the first 5 minutes, and then I'm like, no. Still a little afraid, just shaking my voice. I am a sovereign being. I'm still a little nervous, obviously, but on that same trail, close to dark, I was walking, I was feeling nervous. I was like, okay, I know that they're like creatures, and they're like big, tall, black creatures lurking. And I don't feel like they're going to harm me, but they're definitely freaking me the fuck out. And then a bird landed on the trail in front of me, and instead of flying away, hopped just down the trail, like where I would walk. And then I was like, okay, this bird is leading me out. And then
Mm.
it did that for like a while, several feet, just hopping in front of me. And then it hopped off the trail. And then I was like, okay, I'm getting my confidence back. And then I got a little bit more freaked out. And then the bird hopped back onto the trail and kept hopping. And before, I guess maybe even today, when I went on that walk and I was thinking about the Fae and every little animal I saw, I was like, Fae spirit, Fae spirit, Fae spirit.
Mhm.
Like you are a manifestation of the Fae and also an animal. And so what what do you know about like Fae and their relationship to animal spirits and yeah, I guess we'll start with that.
Okay. I mean that there is, like you say, that the connection is it's blurred lines. It is blurred lines. I would say that in the hierarchy of things, they see themselves slightly above the animal realm. So they will use animals for purpose, as we do. They're particularly, I never knew why. I think it's because of the milk, but they're particularly attracted to animals like cows and goats that they can gain milk from for their purpose. But because they are closer to the natural realm, you do get that sort of that merging and crossover. And you mentioned earlier about fairies shapeshifting and morphing, and they do that, and they will do that to express an emotion. So it's almost like when they get emotions, they can't contain them properly, so that they will take on a persona that shows you what their emotion is. And a good example is I think you guys get it over in the States now, but there's a program called Help My House is Haunted over here. It's a
Mhm.
British one. It's got I don't know whether you know Chris Fleming. He's a medium. He's American. He's come over to do the show, and they gave me a call because they were on the program. They were having issue with a fae, and this fae had two personas, and one persona was sort of house brownie-esque, so it wasn't particularly weird to look at. It was small humanoid, um, but the other aspect that it showed me also showed a couple of other people on the program, sort of on a psychic level, that when it was pissed off, it became really spiky. So it kind of morphed out these kind of spikes out of its body, and its nose became hooked, and it became sort of so it went from being, okay and calm to like boof. And it's almost like, when kids have tantrums and their faces snarl up and they change, because it's easier for them to express their emotions physically as well as it is sort of verbally. It almost had the sense of that. It's like, I can't contain myself, and boof, I've got spikes. Um, so there's that aspect of it. The other aspects are they shapeshift to hide. So if there's, I would imagine skipping through the woods, somebody comes along, they don't particularly like that person's energy, they can boof go into the shape of a bird. That's another aspect.
Mm.
One of my favourite ones is I read the notion that they particularly like taking the piss out of humans. So, and they will mock and mimic. So, if they see a human doing something absolutely ridiculously stupid, like, when you trip over your shoelaces and you start cursing at yourself, they will then take that as a little scene, take it back to the buddies, morph into you, and carry out the scene, much to the hilarity of everybody else. That apparently that's kind of one thing that a certain section of Fae like to do, is like take the piss out of us for being clumsy. So they do it for all different kinds of purposes, and some of them aren't particularly nice purposes. That within the paranormal, so crossing over to that paranormal, they will take on what we see as demonic forms. So when we look back at those medieval woodblock prints, particularly of the lesser demons, the Solomon Keys demons, where you've got an image of an owl head with a distorted human body, or something that looks like part lizard part lion, these little creatures. I often think, are those actually not demonic as we know it and understand it in Christian terms, but are those that kind of darker, earthier elemental that are kind of morphing their emotion and their job, their what they're here to do, in the sense of looking wrong and looking like a distortion of nature. and they will do that to frighten us, and they will do that specifically to put us off from doing something. I mean, when you're looking into witchcraft as well, when you look into witches familiars were said to be from the Fey realm, and they would take the the form of a black cat a lot of the time. So we know that witches familiars, generally we think of a black cat, but they can also be, I've just got that image of the medieval image of there's a witch, and she's got a trunk full of her familiars, and one looks like a frog and one looks like a mouse, but they're all a bit humanistic and distorted, and that very much smacks to me of their fae. That she's called in these elementals to go out and do her bidding, and wants them to specifically look evil, to go out and scare people. Maybe somebody's done her wrong, she sends out a demonic looking frog to go and teach them a lesson. So it's fascinating. I love the kind of that shape-shifting element, and why they do it, and kind of what they get out of it.
Mm-hmm. When you're talking about elementals, I am so interested in the connection between elementals and fae. Now, when you, in your work with fae and like meeting fae, kind of interacting with them, have you met ones that feel like maybe the element of air and feel like water and earth and fire and things like that? Or are they more like, one maybe energy of a fae being that you meet can interact with all the elements? Or yeah, do they stick to like one particular element? Is there a water fae and air fae, things like that?
I think it's one of the avenues that I pursued recently, because it was a word that was bantered about to mean fae. So people were using the word elemental to mean fae, and it didn't sit right to me. Historically, it's easy to look into. It comes from this guy called Paracelsus, who put everything into elements, and said that these beings were actually manifested through humans. So as an alchemist, you would give birth to the elementals. So they weren't from their own realm. That was kind of one way of looking at it. And the more I kind of consider it and talk to people about it, you're right that the fae, they're a bit like us. So we have, that our astrological chart is a perfect way of looking at it. So we have, for me, I'm an air sign, so that's my predominant. And then you have, however many 12 houses of other elements of astrology within you. So I am not just an air sign. I'm the product of at least 12 of the strong combinations of who I am within my astrology. So I have got a lot of fire in there as well. So there's those connections. I think as a whole, they stick within the elements that they are purposeful for. So you will get fae that will stay around water, because it's kind of their purpose to look after the condition of that water and the creatures around that water. So you could consider them as a water elemental, and they won't stray far from that. Just as in the animal kingdom, you get animals that will stay in certain areas, and to survive outside those certain areas are very, very difficult. With the fae, they get their energy. Eating and drinking is an interesting one. They get their energy, and because they're energetic beings, they are there because of an energetic exchange. So their job and their purpose is to have this symbiotic relationship with water, say. So whatever they give into the water by helping it stay healthy, the water then gives back their energy to be able to keep the fae alive. So they are kind of attached in this marriage with their environment because of that energetic exchange. I mean, they can sort of shift about and move around and what have you. And again, I'm rambling now on it, but it goes into that whole notion of, when you've got your lesser deities, ancient lesser deities, that when we stopped singing about, and when we stopped talking about the gods died. And it's the same with fairies. That whole concept of, if you say you don't believe in fairies, one drops dead. It's because they also have a connection with our energy. So if you when people stop believing in the ancient deities, they cease to exist, because we weren't putting energy into them. And it's the same with the fae. We can create that kind of relationship with them where we do have that symbiotic exchange of things. Sorry, that was a lot to lot to take
No, no,
on.
no, I love it. I was thinking about one of the things that I read in that John Michael Greer book was talking about how Fae can create like an illusion, an
Mhm,
illusionary state for us, right? And they can kind of alter human consciousness. And
mhm,
the fact that they have been known to alter human consciousness for me kind of shows that they are connected to our human consciousness. So that goes exactly to what you just said.
mhm,
And the whole like not believing in them, then they like, if they drop dead or it's for me, I was feeling getting the notion of like them going to sleep
mhm,
more or less. Like our belief in them gives them life, but it's not like they like die because they're always here because and everything is everything kind of to that
mhm,
concept. But then I was also thinking about the way that we view animals and the way that we look at our companion animals, dog, cat, bird, whatever you have in the house, um, and the wild animals is almost like robotic, like they are driven for to like reproduce, to eat, and to die, and that's
mhm,
it. And I feel like it goes to pointing our perception at the fae. We'll see the fae, well, with your mushrooms, I
mhm,
never saw so you're tripping over mushrooms. And that's my experience with the fae. After I heard your interview with on Paranormal Karen, I had so many fae interactions like in my house. Like I was seeing them in doorways and they were
mhm,
communicating with me in my mind. And I had to like set some really strict boundaries. I was like, what the fuck? Um, and then in that moment, I was like, holy shit, you point your perception at it, you see it.
mhm,
And if you don't, it's like it's not there, right? It goes to sleep. And I feel like it's the same way with my work with animals and animal communication. And it's not just my work. I mean, it's scientists and esoteric
yeah,
studies that have kind of like gone into this. But looking at animals as like not just emotional intelligent creatures but creatures that are also energetic beings, and if we don't perceive them as energetic beings then they will become survival driven and sex driven and live and die and that's it. But
mhm,
if we can open ourselves up to the fact that they are more than that they are energetic beings, that allows them, it's almost like our connection to them like opens up a portal. Like it's a co-creation
mhm,
of this, and it's not like humans are allowing it. It's that our perception of this energy that they are to them maybe obviously displaying, it's just like we're taking their hand and creating something together. But we have just like not been taking the hand of our the wood spirits, of the animal spirits, of nature in general. It's been like I feel like I'm getting the image of just presenting their hand. And it's like you can reach out and you can touch it and we can like create something together. We can open worlds together. But for so long, I guess since the Industrial Revolution, we've just kind of severed that connection. And so
mhm,
now the fae are sleeping or the fae are dropping dead because we're not believing in them. And animals are just, we're so disconnected from them, like animal agriculture. We can like destroy parts of
mhm,
the rainforest just so we can have a hamburger. And
mhm,
it's like we only see certain animals as profit, and animals is just like dead things, like the earth as like a dead thing,
mhm,
like it's just a resource and not this
yeah,
living being. And then it can become that in our perception. I'm putting so many things together in my
and I mean that last bit that you said about that we do, I think that this is where our connection with the Fae and our relationship with the Fae um, should be, and as a strength and a and it is, I know people understand the kind of the hippie concepts of, we are running out of resources, environmental, etc. But it's just that we cannot just keep taking without giving back. We know that, we know that, and yet we still do it. And actually, that one of the jobs, one of the purposes for Faye of an overall is to work with us on that. That they're not like they I mean, they do get pissed off with us on a massive scale about environmental issues, because it's their food as well, and it's their life and their energy as well that we're messing with. um, and they do a lot of the time beg for us just to say, okay, then what do we do? Where's the first steps? And it can be just as very basic. Even if you don't want to work with a fae and you don't want to see them and you don't have an interaction with them, but it can be very very basic. Of when you go for a walk in the woods, take a carrier bag and just put any litter in that you see, and just take it home with you. But they do want to, they want us on board with making this, this a utopia, and they're saying, it's a big thing of like, it's not a big thing to do that. It's very, very simple, very, very simple steps that we can create this world where we have these great relationships with nature, and it can be comfortable. We don't have to be outside our comfort zones to do that. But yeah, it is one of their massive purposes. It's when you start interacting with the fae, it's one thing that they'll tell you time and time again. When you have negative interactions with fae, it's usually because you've had some negative interaction within the environment. If you have positive interactions with fae, it's usually because you've given back to the environment, and it all boils down to that. It all boils down to, like you say, understanding we are energetic beings living in an energetic world, and the material needs looking after, else, it's not going to be here for us to enjoy.
And you were talking, and I was thinking like of that analogy of them reaching out their hand, and like our perception of them gives them energy, gives them life, allows them to whatever. But I was also like, it's an energy exchange though. So if we can perceive them and then they can perceive us, it's like they get energy from us, but then we also get energy from them that opens up realms within our consciousness. And so it's like we're not just, perceiving these spirits in order to help them, come into our world but it's like we are able to come into our inner worlds and then our outer worlds, and it's just all connected. And yeah, it can be like, we are all one, we're all connected, but it's so much, it's like deeper than that. And it is so interesting how things like paranormal investigating and kind of going into these more like shadowy aspects of ourselves and of our outer world lead us back to this like more, I guess you could say, light aspect of, everything is connected, everything is everything. And so many people kind of like stray away from those shadowy aspects but I found moments where it's like something that I'm not wanting to admit, because I feel like if I admit it about myself, then that makes me a bad person, or it makes, that I'm bad. And it's as soon as I admit it, I never feel like I'm it's just like, it's just like a release, it's just kind of like, I feel like that's connected with seeing the shadowy aspects, diving into that, and then coming back into the light. And it is just kind of like this dance of everything being connected. And I'm interested in, when you're on this might be like a totally sidetrack, but when you're on a paranormal investigation, how like you said that they called you onto the show to bring you in because they knew that they had a fae spirit. How do you know when you're investigating, or how did they even have an idea of like, oh, this is fae versus, a spirit that has been in the liminal space left behind haunting a building? Like, how do you differentiate that?
It's a difficult question, and there are significant clues. Whether you're psychic or not, there are significant clues. How I ended up on the show was the paranormal team that I'm in. My boss is a presenter on the show, so he knows that I have this ability to be able to sort of broaden out my scope of remote viewing to other beings and to other energies. And they were having a puzzling time. They'd done some work, EVP work, where they'd been getting the word pixie come through, and I was given absolutely no information at all. He just said, we've got this entity in the house, we don't know what it is, we want you to have it, will you remote view? And all I asked him for was, I said, could you send me a photograph of the front door so I've got somewhere I can go into the house? And with no information, I had this picture of the front door, and I went in, and I pretty much encountered it straight away. It was very much wanting to be noticed. The clues after that, they kind of all joined up, were the fact that they had a small replica iron stove in their kitchen, like a little Arga stove, and that was repetitively being thrown. And they didn't understand why. Well, we know that fae don't like iron. It repulses. So some fae cannot even go anywhere near it. Some fae are completely repulsed by it. That's another story, but another mystery. So I did this remote viewing, went into the house, and this fae, it wanted to talk to me instantly. It genuinely wanted to resolve this situation because it wasn't happy. It showed me the image of an orchard, and with trees being cut down, and it literally getting so mad. I mean, it was crackly mad, and it was super, super pissed off. And he said, this is why. And I said, well, how can we ease this situation? How can we, start building bridges and ease this situation? So I took that information back to the show. They went off and then did a piece with the people whose house it was. They said, no, we've not cut any trees down on our property. But then they said, oh, we lived in France. This didn't air actually, and we cut down a large proportion of an orchard. And yes, thinking back, strange things did start happening there. So this thing had travelled with them, sort of still beating its pissed off little drum, going, I'm still not happy with the situation. So of their own accord, they went out and planted some trees in their back garden. As an offering to say that they were sorry about it, and did the little things by acknowledging that this fae was there with them, and leaving it out, offerings, etc. So from there, that seems to kind of pop up a lot for me in different environments. And it sounds like every haunted situation has these things. And a lot of them do, bizarrely enough. So if anybody's a paranormal investigator out there, please try and tune into this. So I've recently wrote an article. It's coming out at the end of this month in Haunted magazine. That's about the attraction that haunted properties have. So like all energy, if you have a spirit that's trapped, that kind of resonance of that spirit trapped in that house, it's trapped not because it wants to be there, but because of some traumatic experience. So hauntings are, I would say 90% of the time, people have had traumatic experiences. That spirit then puts off a vibration into that environment, and you get something that's known as sick house syndrome. So people they feel very depressed, they have trouble with electronics, etc., and it all kind of builds in this negative energy. So picture this: you're kind of on the kind of darker end of the scale of the fae, and you're skipping around, and you see this beacon of darkness resonating out of this property, and you think, well, that looks a fun place to go, because that's its vibrational level. So it pitches in as well. So in these haunted properties, they do attract these what are seen as lesser demonics, which I believe are fae, into the property, because it's kind of the energy that they need to feed and need to play, and it all builds up into a weird atmosphere of things going off. So coming down to getting to the brass tacks of how you figure out what's going off. I mean, for me, remote viewing is an absolute must. If you're able to do that. I think one of the key things that I've found, I've got a YouTube channel myself, and it's one of the questions that I've been asking all kinds of plethora of people about how to work with fae. What do we do? How do we know? And it's under the umbrella of paranormal investigators. So with that specifically, and the one key thing that I have found is the fae can't lie. So if you are very clever with your questioning, if you're doing EVP work, or if you're doing spirit board work, etc., if you're very clever, they can bend the truth. They can be mischievous with the truth, but they cannot lie. Whereas when you have demonics or you have dark and malevolent spirits, they will lie outright, up and outright, and they will do it all day long. So that seems to be the key to knowing the difference. Other than that, fae will demonstrate typical poltergeist activity, throw things, steal things, manifest things out of the air, start off small fires, etc. They will have that. They will also display classic hauntings, banging doors, knockings, rappings, tying your hair to the bed head, and that kind of thing. It's just getting to a level of feeling your way around as well. Have you seen an apparition? Are you getting a sense that it's human? If it's not human, I'm very much of the sense of in the paranormal world, we are all quick to sensationalize into it's a demon. I mean, we see it on programs, all over the place, that if it's inexplicable in a human term, it's got to be demonic, and I actually personally believe that demonic hauntings are so rare. that kind of end of the scale. And I think it is these, what would have been, like I say, what would have been deemed as lesser demonics that are for me of the Fae realm.
When you talk about I guess the only idea that I have of demons is something that is just so warped from like Christianity and then from like, you know, different movies and tales and stuff. So it's like when you say demonic, where do you think that that energy, this is probably a huge question, but in your perspective and in your experiences, where do you think like demonic energy like comes from? Is that something of the earth? Is that something that is like in another dimension that like our consciousness can reach out and touch? Is it something that like works with maybe our shadowy aspects and our consciousness to manifest? Like, what do you think about that?
I think it's all those things. I think human beings can, we can create sort of demonic energies. And we've seen in classic poltergeist cases where people have actually manifested through PK, so through their own energies, they've actually manifested monsters, if you like, and can physically see these monsters, and that comes from our shadow selves and from creating that kind of energy. I think that the other side of it is it can be that these are possibly misinterpretations of deep earth spirits. So again, on the Fey realm, there's I've encountered two over the last few years, and the first time I encountered one, I was like, "What the fucking hell is this?" I have no idea what this is, and it was Lord of the Rings. Is it Balrog, the one that's deep? He's deep in the cavern, and he's this big flame, fire and
Yeah.
brimstone with the wit type character. Well, this thing was very much like that, and it was that big. It's as big as a house, and it was just did not want to communicate with me, had no interest in anything or that. It was just so primeval. This thing was so primeval that I was just like, don't know what to do with you, mate. I really don't know what to do. And then that was with one person who, it was an interesting story. He had gone on a paranormal investigation. He was actually the manager of the place we were going, so wasn't particularly attached to the paranormal. But we'd started chatting, and he said, he pulled me to one side and said, "Can I have a chat with you? I'm experiencing weird things." So we had this chat, and he used to be many years ago an archaeologist, and so I did some psychic work with him, and I said, "You've dug something up that you shouldn't have taken away, and it's something big. You've been to a sacred spot that's kind of earth energy sacred as well as human imbued sacred." And I said, "You've taken something from it." And he was clicking it over and clicking it over, and he'd been to a Celtic site where he'd taken a massive part of a building, and they were meant to put it back, and they didn't. It was like a big sleeper, a big bit of wood, and this thing, and he as he was thinking back, he was like, "Shit, this is when all the nightmares started." And it was this same creature that he was kind of encountering. And then months later, I encountered a lovely couple, an older couple, who had been experiencing so much paranormal activity in the home. It was just they just used to laugh at it because it was so bad that it was just like, what else can we do with this? Because it was crazy. It's crazy.
Mhm.
And again, there were lots of different things that I saw going off in the house, but over the top of the house, I saw this creature again, or a very similar creature. Didn't want to interact with me, would not tell me why it was there. It was there. And remembering what I'd remembered from the first guy I'd encountered, I said to them, I think these are connected with earthworks. So when you're disrespectful in churning up the earth, it's almost like, when you're quarrying and you hit this, you probably hit these kind of things if you're disrespectful in your quarrying or whatever you. And they couldn't relate it back at all. And then a few weeks later, I got an email from her saying, "Oh, my dad was a builder, so he would dig out the foundations for buildings and stuff. Do you think that could be?" And it's like, absolutely. These things felt like that they would attach to a family and jump generations and just keep going, because they got it into the mindset that family needed punishing for the way they'd punished the earth. it's crazy, but definitely that could be mistaken as sort of that demonic energy, and the look of them is very demonic, you know, that fire and brimstone and sort of bubbling, churning smokiness. So I think it's all things. I think it's like you were saying before, that everything's everything. So it can be self-manifestation. It can be it can be things from the earth. It can be things from a different realm. You know, I'm not one to dismiss the the terms of hell, or that idea. I'm kind of, I'm wide open to anything until something tells me that it's not true. Until something categorically says no, that's not true. I'd say, yeah, let's believe in everything until something comes up and puts that wall and says, actually, that's not true anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say most of the research I've done when I hear about demonic beings or like these really scary, evil, whatever word you want to put on it, beings, it just seems like it is a projection from like our inner, the things that we are denying about
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. And may that be something that, like, our grandfather did, that has been following us, and it's this itching that's inside of us that we can't put a finger on, and then it's frustrating, and then it comes out and in front of us, and then it manifests, and then it's haunting this house or this building or something. And it does feel like it's both things. And I was reading about this book, came across my Amazon Prime, or like Audible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I never heard of it before. It's called Egregores.
Mm-hmm.
And it was talking about, and it's this whole book, and I'd never heard the word before. And then I was like, I mean, it seems interesting. So I got it, and just listening to this audiobook. Are you familiar with what an egregore is?
Is that in the? I'm going to get this completely wrong. Is that in the dragon realm? Is that?
I wish. I think you're thinking of like, I think that there is a dragon story called like Aragon, or like something like
Yes, you're
that.
right. That's what I've got in my head.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
I work a lot with dragon energy, so I'm not surprised that your mind went there. But my understanding from this book of an egregore is like, it is this entity that is brought to life from thought form.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
so yeah. And so it can be anything from like, in an occult view of what an egregore is. It could be a spiritual view of what an egregore is, or could be, or it can be something that like collectively we all point our perception at, like, I don't know, Jeff Bezos or something. And then this thought form becomes something that is attached to him. And so, I was watching an episode of Kindred Spirits, which is like, okay. And John E.L. Tenney just happened to be guest starring on that, and I am a huge fan of his work and his thoughts and his research. And they were just like, "Oh my God, it's a demon! It's a demon!" And he was like, "I think we're dealing with an egregore. Like, I think we're dealing with somebody, like a bunch of people pointing their perception at this building, at the events of this building, created this being." And it was the first time. I mean, I just recently got into paranormal. I've never been able to watch like horror movies, or like I kind of like sleep with a nightlight on. I've always been that way, so I've never ever considered myself to be interested. I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna like dive into the paranormal. But once I learned about this like other aspect of the paranormal, that like humans and our consciousness and our perceptions and projections are co-creating these like hauntings, that has been so interesting to me. And that has really, like, it's changed the way that I look at the world. It's changed the way that I work with different energies that I'm working with. I take more responsibility for the things that I'm encountering. It's like I know that it's not all outside of me. It's like a co-creation. But yeah, anytime I hear about like these more like evil things, I'm like, that feels like human. And we are so separate from like the capabilities of our consciousness and our energy, that we're immediately like, oh no, that's something separate from us, and it's evil and it's demonic and it's against God. But it's like, if we could just open ourselves up to the possibility that we can create those things, and we are both that and God, and this like heaven and this like light and energy, we are both things. And it just opens the world up, and it empowers people again, right? And it empowers people, and then it also like takes away, because you were talking about these maybe like deep earth spirits and how they present themselves. In my mind, I was like, I feel like they're not always in that form, right?
No.
They're presenting themselves to us in a way that's like trying to get a message across. And so it just comes back to like, if we can just open ourselves up, kind of take more responsibility, humble ourselves, look at the world as this and that, then we can also empower these beings to just like live amongst us and like live more or less in peace with us. I mean, I'm sure that Faye will still like fuck with us because it's funny, but like I fuck with people because I think that it's funny, So I get it. Like, and it's, I'm just so like, yeah, my world has just totally opened up. And I think that that's, with my work with animals and animal spirits, it definitely does not just stay with animals and animal spirits, but I feel like animals are like a physical manifestation of these like otherworldly beings, of these fantastical creatures that we read about in books. And while I do think that there is some danger in that we can approach animals in an almost disrespectful way because they're, how they're written about or portrayed in Disney movies, I think that there is some truth in that they are both from this world and live beyond this world.
Mhm.
And just in my work and trying to like bridge that gap with humans and animals, it's opened me up. It's like in paranormal and fae and like elementals. And I work with dragon energy constantly. Like they are like, they're like, some people say that they're like angelic, and I've been told that I'm like an angelic being, and I'm like, Christianity has ruined that for me. I do
Yeah.
not identify as an angel. But the more you look into like different ideas of what angels are, they can be beings just covered totally in eyes, or they can be like, they can have like 6 arms and 6 legs, and they are almost like what we would consider demonic. And so it's like, it's just, humans are just pointing their perception always outside of themselves, and always like, this is something outside of me and something that is bad and something. But if we just turned inside, I feel like just everything would just open up. And I'm just having so many, I feel like, paradigm shifts and profound moments. I'm not even asking you any questions. I'm just kind of like, listen to all the things.
I tell you what, that there's a book that I've had on my read list for forever, and I finally got around to reading it over Christmas. If it's everything you're saying in a book, and it will absolutely blow your mind. I've been reading it, I'm like, every section I understand, but I've never seen it put together in one book. Everything. And when you're reading it, you're going, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. It's called The Holographic Universe. And I've got it on the bedside. I can't. If you type in holographic universe, it deals with paranormal. It deals with reincarnation. It deals with, very briefly, the fae, with ghosts, etc. But the difference is, it comes from a scientific perspective. So the first couple of chapters I found very hard going, because it talks about atoms and it talks about shifts and whatever you. But it says all that you're saying, but it also explains it a lot deeper in a scientific term that you just go, holy shit. This isn't just spiritual kind of wobbly in the universe kind of stuff that people can't get to grips with. This is stuff that you can present to other people who don't understand this and say, yeah, but how do you explain this? Because science can't, or science does and says, yes, it does exist. It's amazing. It'll blow your mind. It absolutely blew my mind. Just going back to, if you don't mind, you were saying about you sleeping with the night light on, etc. I got into the paranormal. I've always been into anything strange, supernatural, weird, anything other. Always. Ghosts, for me, particularly poltergeists, terrified me to the core. To the core. And I got to a certain big birthday, and I was asking my brother, I want to celebrate it, I want to mark it in some way. And he said, well, why don't you do something that, you're scared of? Why don't, people, he was thinking bungee jumping, or, jumping out of a plane, or that kind of thing. And he said, well, what are you really scared of? I said, the only thing that really terrifies me on this planet is poltergeists. And I hadn't looked into it specifically because it scared me, it terrified me. So I decided I was going to look into going on some ghost hunts, and the thing absolutely snowballed, the whole, and I ended up in teams and doing talks and whatever. Yeah. But the first probably month of getting my bravery with the situation, I said I had this theory that spirits could hear your thoughts. So I said in my head, just before falling asleep, if there's spirit about, could you make yourself known? And I was woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning by a vase with a bunch of flowers being thrown off my dresser. And it woke me up because it was rocking backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. Looking back, I think I manifested that. That was not spirit. That was not ghost. That was because I had all this nervous energy around these things occurring, that I now know that that was me putting the energy out, that's what I wanted to receive back. But ultimately I'll say, don't try it, because honestly it absolutely terrified me. I was proper sat up in bed like, oh my God. And then I was thinking, you stupid cow, you've just asked for it. You asked for this to happen. And then when it does, you're
Yeah.
like, shit. But it is amazing when you've got that raw energy, especially if you come from a place where, um, I didn't like the darkness. I was afraid of the darkness, and I was afraid of what might happen. And I had some paranormal experiences when I was a child that kind of blew my head away, and wouldn't touch it with a barge pole from there on in. And I had bits and bobs of encounters, but as soon as it's like anything else, as soon as you open up, it starts happening. It was,
Mm.
and when you were saying that, I had a really good chat, a really good interview on my YouTube channel with an Irish guy called Thomas Sheridan, he's an author. He's all things fake. If you can get him on, get him on. He is mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing. But he did a talk on his YouTube channel about the accidental magician, and it was what he was talking about. He talked in terms of when you get a group of paranormal investigators together who all have the intent to have a paranormal experience. That collective energy is so powerful that chances are they're going to get it. But there's the other aspect of it, that they leave that energy there. And over here, we have cases of places that are investigated on a regular basis. So, castles or hotels, etc., where paranormal teams are going in day after day after day. They're leaving their energy of exactly that in that place, and it just builds and builds and builds. So you'll find that these places become more and more haunted as more and more people investigate. And it is because these people are basically leaving these thought ghosts, dropped into the place, and these things are like, letting off their own energy. It's fascinating stuff, absolutely fascinating.
It's, yes, fascinating. I feel like it's just like barely brushes how I feel about it, but it also is it is fascinating. I'm just like, I'm so like drawn into this version of like paranormal activity, or this like perception of it, because it takes away that like that Hollywood, the stories, the scary, the Christianity, demons. It takes it away, and it gives the power back to the person. And then it also gives the power back to the people in our consciousness. And then we you can actually grasp, because they say that like what you believe you create, what you put your attention at you attract, things like that. And like I've always kind of looked at it more as like, oh, if I want a certain job, I'll get the job. Or if I want like a certain pair of pants or something, and the next day I'm at the store and I see that pair of pants. And it's like things like that have been proven to me, but this is just like one step above that, maybe
Mm-hmm.
two or three steps above that. And it's like, we are interacting with a world that mirrors back to us what we believe and what we point our perception at. And I think that the Fae is just like a great example of that. And it is not this like, to me, it's not just like this like mythical, magical, mystical thing that we can't like touch or interact with. And it is just like existing in another world. It's like it is in and around us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just like, and we were talking earlier when you were saying how like if a fae spirit is around and then it might not trust a person, they might like manifest as an animal and kind of like meander off or something like that. That's how I felt in that moment with that bird,
Mm-hmm.
because I knew that there were these like huge but in like creatures lurking, and I use the word creatures, but they were these beings, these entities, kind of in my perspective lurking, but they may have just been like walking around, they may have been dancing, but to me I was like, woo, it's like this scary thing. And they're like, oh, okay, um and like she's not like quite ready to perceive us in
Yeah.
this way, let's like show her, and then it was this beautiful, it wasn't just any bird, it was like this small bright blue bird. And it just like, it's always amazing to me when animals that can fly walk instead of
Mm-hmm.
fly.
Mm-hmm.
And the bird did it twice on the same trail right when I started to get a little bit nervous. And I talk about like my guides like presenting themselves to me in a way that I am ready to perceive them.
Yes.
And I feel like that can also be related to, like, I mean, maybe my guides are like these giant beings with like no face or like two faces or three faces, but I'm like just experiencing them as like a voice in my head or like a knowing. And I joke, like sometimes when I first was starting to like really kind of test the waters or test the boundaries, I would lay in my room and I'd be like, all right, I'm ready. You just show me what you look like. Just show me. And I could feel them just being like, bitch,
Not
you're
yet.
not ready.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you are not. It's like they knew. And it's like, because they are me. So another aspect of
Yeah.
myself was like, no, 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 no. If we just straight up present ourselves to you, you're going to shut down. You're
Yeah.
going to, like, I don't know, go to Christianity or something. Like, you're just going to like totally pivot. And we don't need that for you right now. And I almost feel like it's the same way with like paranormal. It's like, you know, I mean, I've heard John Tenney talk about how, you know, you perceive, oh, my grandmother, and she was wearing this hat that I always loved of hers. But it's like they're presenting themselves to you in a way that you can digest. And I feel like, I mean, I'm curious to know, I mean, do you feel like it's that way with the Fae? Like if, I mean, you might interact with a being and it might be the same being that I'm interacting with, but it looks different to me. Do you feel like, I don't know what I'm trying to ask.
I think they have like a resting state, which is just where they're not even in a conscious thought about, you know, what they are. And I think they have a sort of a physicality about them that's a resting state physicality, and then they use those shifts to expose their feeling, expose the situation, I think, a lot better. And you're right about the perceptive thing as well, about our perceptions of them do change them as well. So if we cannot mentally grasp, because it would melt our minds, they will either do that and think it was funny, or they won't do that to sort of, because they know that it's too much for you to take on board. It's interesting, and it does relate back. You were saying about, you know, you visualize your grandmother in that hat, and that's how you possibly see her apparition or whatever. The other aspect is, if you and it took me a while to figure this out. So when I was remote viewing, I don't do mediumship. It's something that a line that I've never gone down. But I do sometimes have interaction with spirit, and I was going around locations because the team that I'm in, we're an events company as well, so we go around a lot of locations, and I would do physical walkthroughs around locations to check the locations out and to talk to the staff, and I kept getting this repetitive, like, it was a different woman in these locations, obviously, because it was location specific, but they would have pretty much the same colour blue in their dress. Dresses would be different, but over a series of locations, and it took me ages to figure it out. It's like, there's no way throughout all those different stages of history this same blue would be a popular blue colour. It's not how history works. And then there was one day when I was thinking about, I'd come across another one, and she literally was making me wring my hands. I was walking around, I couldn't stop. It was like almost an obsessive thing. And she was showing me that she was anxious. And I suddenly clicked that this blue that they were showing me in the dress that they were, you know, the attire that they were wearing, represented anxiety and depression. So it was like, duh, why, you know, they were showing me something that was in my bank of symbols that I should have very easily connected, that they were giving me that as a big clue, you know, of what state of mind they were in, you know. And I think it's the same with Faye, that they will, they can quite often, I mean, another thing, so when I was going around locations, I was coming across 3 of these imp type characters, the kind of classic looking imp type characters, and there was always 3 in the locations where they were. There was always 3, and again, it was like, there's no way you guys just hang around in 3s all the time. You're not a species that there's 3 of you and no more. And actually, when I started contemplating it, what 3 meant was that there was more than one. So that they were psychically showing me 3 because they were saying there's more than one of us here. And that was, again, something that I had to pull from my own sort of knowledge bank. And it all comes back to that. I mean, I've got one theory, and I'm sorry I'm rambling again, but I've got one theory about the whole mark of the demon within the paranormal, which is the scratches of the three fingers. Most fae have three fingers and a thumb. They don't have the fourth. And so you get these impish type characters, and they have these three fingers. So it could be manifestation from that. So the three of these, seeing these impish type things, could also be that whole. It could be, the reference to the Holy Trinity and the mocking of that, or it could be, three means that they're solid and that they've got a solid base there. It's kind of, working these things out and having the kind of brain to do it on site, so you can say to them, what does this mean? Why are you showing me three, instead of just thinking, oh, there's three of them in the attic. There's always three of them in the attic, and it's crazy what energetically the universe gives you. They will give you in a way that's a deep-seated trigger, as opposed to a material trigger. So they will give you things that on that higher level you do understand and and you get, but actually that conversation can be slowed down a lot of the time between your higher self and your material self. So it's all, I'm like you, everything is so interconnected that it's mind-blowing, and it never ever ends. It just continuously unfolds and refolds and unfolds and refolds. It's just mind-blowing.
Yeah. I almost don't want it to end, but I find myself like being driven by there being an answer,
Yes.
but it's like, I'm just like, while you were talking, I was like, I'm just so grateful to live in and have the perception that I have, that is like ever growing in this paranormal community that I like. I'm like, I'm not a part of anything or into anything, but I'm into all of the things. And it's just like, it's seriously given me such a foundation, the way that I look at the world and just day-to-day interactions now. Like, it's all just woven into each other. It's almost impossible to be like, oh, I have like this life where I work a 9 to 5 and I'm like a daughter to a mom and a dad who work hard, and it's like impossible to separate the two, because it's like all just, everything is just so deeply connected. And I feel like I could talk to you for days. I don't know. People say hours. Like, I could just be like, I just like want to always have a phone and just be like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Oh my God, this is this experience I had, and where can we go? And we could just like it. I feel like what this conversation has been is we've started with like a ball of yarn, and this conversation just been pulling at it and pulling at it and pulling at it, but it never stops. Like, it's just always going to be this ball of yarn. And I feel like some people might kind of get discouraged by the fact that there is no like end point with this, but I almost encourage those people to look beyond. I don't know. I don't have any advice for those people. I just want to say that, like, I'm not one of those people, and I'm not one to give you advice. It's just cool. Like, if you feel like you're going to find an endpoint, you probably will find an endpoint. Like, if that is your perception, right? Because it just goes back to getting presented to us what we believe. And so I don't know, man. My mind is just, I don't have words anymore. What are words? So can you talk a little bit about your YouTube channel? Like, what do you do on there? Where can people find you on YouTube? And I know you have other places, but you've talked about that a lot, and I didn't know you had that, and I'd love to look into that more.
So that started, it's never ever been anything that I wanted really to have. I'm not putting it out there for millions of subscribers. I wanted to look into the Fae in terms of the paranormal, basically, because I had questions that I didn't feel like I could answer on my own. So I've had psychic mediums on there. I've had Wiccan priests on there. I've had paranormal investigators on there. I've had faeryologists on there, and kind of explored their notions of what Fae is, with the slant that how that fits into the paranormal, because people were starting to come to me and expecting me to have all the answers to everything. And people saying, well, I think I've got a fairy in my house, but it's kind of haunting, and what do you think about this, and X, Y, and Z? And I just said, you know what, I don't know all the answers, but I know we're after people I can drag into this and see if we can work through it ourselves. So it was more so a personal project to kind of document with some incredibly knowledgeable people about what Fae was, and try and put some of those jigsaw pieces together. And it was absolutely fascinating. I mean, the amount of people that said yes to talking to me was just ridiculous. I'd come across a fine artist who won the Turner Prize in Britain, which is a really prestigious fine art award, who had a very small article in I think it was in a newspaper, that said that he'd had an encounter with a gnome. I think it was a gnome or a pixie. He said a pixie when he was young, and that had kind of had a ricocheting effect on him becoming an artist. And I was like, I've got to talk to this guy. You know, this guy is like, he's a fine artist. He's held in high esteem, you know, and he's talking about pixies. And I messaged him, and he was like, yeah, sure, I'd love to come and talk to you. And I was like, really? You know, and it was just this rolling thing. I've had a bit of a break from it. There has been, I think there's about 13 episodes on there. I've had a bit of a break. I'm back on it at the end of next week. Opening that back up again. So yeah, if there's anybody out there who has different perspectives on the Fae, or how it interacts with the paranormal, or anything strange, I do love to hear from people, you know. So that's Hair in the Hawthorn. If you type that into YouTube, and I think you can get it from putting in Kate Hair Girl Ray as well. So hair girl as in animal. I've just done the bunny rabbit ears. That's really bad. And I am on Facebook, but I dropped out of Facebook land for a while. Instagram, I love Instagram. I just it's kind of a world you can create of beautiful things. So I'm definitely on Instagram. That's Kate Hair Girl Ray. And I'm also on Twitter, which is more my paranormal thing. I don't understand Twitter. I think I'm getting to that age where it's like a jumble sale. I go on and go, what? Where does that? Anyway, I
don't get it either.
No. So that's kind of social platforming type thing. I do bits of writing for a British-based magazine, and you wouldn't be surprised to know that is Fae related under the paranormal. So it's you know, I've been chucking things in this way and that way with that magazine. So yeah, I'm kind of hoping things have kind of got quiet. I think it's because people aren't going out on investigations and stuff. So I think everybody's kind of missing going out and interacting with other human beings. You know, I think it's so things have been quite quiet, but I'm hoping things pick back up. And yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Listen, I could talk to you for hours, and it's nice to find somebody who has got that kind of that there is no parameters. You know, when you talk about Fae, people just want to talk about Fae, or when you talk about paranormal, people just want to talk about paranormal. I went on I know I'm rambling again. I went on a radio show a few years ago. It was Halloween, and it was one of my first very, very early interviews, and I was terrified of doing this interview because it was a BBC interview, which is the big TV show, television station over here, but it was radio. And I got to the end of the phone call, which was 45 minutes, and I could remember nothing that I had said because I was so terrified. A few minutes later, a friend rang me up and said, "Yeah, you did really well," because I'd said, you know, I need some feedback. She says, "Yeah, you did really well. You do know that you talk quite a lot about fairies, don't you?" And I was like, what? You know, it was this Halloween show, and they wanted ghosts, and I listened to it back. It was all relevant to what they were asking, but so I don't put things in boxes. If somebody asks me a question and I get a connective, I'm just like, I'm there, you know, and like you, sort of all over the place. But I think that's how it should be. You know, there is no, our boxes are the boxes that we put into the world, and that's it. They're not there. They're not real. Boxes aren't real to put things in.
Right. Yeah, I felt that way when I was young, and I kept feeling pressure to put myself into a
Yes.
box. Like I am a girl who likes broccoli, or like just whatever. You just
Mhm.
want to like figure out who you are. And then I realized that I was like putting myself into all these different boxes. And then I was like, what do I do if I just don't have the boxes anymore? And it was like this slow process of how I identify, personally identify and internally like organize my thoughts and my beliefs and stuff. And then it just kind of like started to unfold. And then, you read the right article or you hear the right interview, and then it just like slowly starts to unravel. And then you realize it is just kind of like one giant blob of, I don't know if blob is the right,
It's
but it just
exactly the
feels like,
right word. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it just feels like, yeah, we're just in like, and it is just, everything is everything. And I love that I have had the courage in myself to take the route of like working on like the shadowy aspects, and not like being like, what is a demon and what is this, and just questioning all these things, because it's just brought me kind of back to where I was, but at an elevated point of
Mhm.
that. And it is just so beautiful, and I'm so happy to have you on this podcast to just kind of connect these ideas and these thoughts, and to give them and spread them out to other people. And so that it's like we're just planting a seed, and then like walking away, and then like whoever is inspired by this conversation, or is something that it's like it lights something up in them, and they can go do their own research, and just kind of like that ripple effect. And that is kind of like what I want to do with this platform, and just in my life in general, is just like drop a seed, drop a pebble in the water, and just and then detach from it and just watch it grow. And just like, or I guess detaching from it, I'm not watching it grow, but knowing that maybe it's growing, and it doesn't matter to me because I've dropped the seed. And yeah, I did want to ask before we go, do you have like any like book suggestions, or like if people are interested in wanting to know more of like the history of the Fae, or like yeah, specifically of the Fae? I know you said holographic universe, but that's kind of like bigger picture.
Yeah.
But specifically like yeah, like Fae lore, or Fae like historical books or whatever. Any kind of books that you suggest?
I think for me, the I always say to people when they say, "Where do I start with this word?" I would say, go to where you're drawn. I mean, I'm not particularly drawn to fairy tale, and I know that there's a lot of information that you can gather from fairy tale. I'm slightly more drawn to folklore than I am to fairy tale, which there is a distinct difference. For me, it was artwork that kind of compounded fairies for me, and it was the artwork of Brian Froud, who was one of the concept artists on the Labyrinth movie with David Bowie, and the Dark Crystal. He was also
Mm.
concept artist, and that's how people will know from that. And this I don't know how much of that you can see is one of his. It's not an original painting. I wish it was, but that's one of his. But his books for me opened up this whole scope of this is exactly how I experience Fae, whereas artwork that I'd seen before had been very Victorian, very twee, had been flower fairies, etc. But in his books, he goes through the whole realms of very gnarly creatures, and for me, that kind of fed and still does feed my my energy really with the understanding. So I'm quite a visual person. I have got literally a raft of books, and I started on the YouTube channel doing book reviews. One of the first book reviews I did was the Fairy Bible, and this book, when it turned up, I'd seen somebody else mention it. I'd never come across it before. If I had, I'd looked at the front cover and gone, not my bag, it's not my kind of thing. It looked a bit rubbish. Actually, just as a flick through, it was just, I was shocked at how good this book is, because when it said Fairy Bible, I just thought, how much can they put in a book about the different, different elementals, etc. It depends what you're drawn to. I mean, there are lots of people out there who do like fairy meditations as well, on the net, etc. For getting, if you want to get into the side of communicating with them. For me, I'm at the stage, I suppose, like you, where I am kind of I'm encompassing a lot of things, and I'm wanting to draw in lots of different elements. So I know it's very popular at the minute, but I've gone back to reading the Mothman prophecies, which is something that I read as a teenager, and looking at those in terms of the Fae. So I've been looking at that particular book of where the crossovers are in that kind of thing. So book terms, the world's your oyster. Just I would go to what you're attracted to. I mean, I have sections of books which I've bought because they are beautiful fairy books. They're beautifully printed, they're beautifully embossed books. They have beautiful images in. Actually, the content's not brilliant. Then I have the other side of them, which are a bit more experience. A bit more about experiences, etc., and a bit more meaty. There is one, if I can see the title. Let's excuse me. Oh, I thought I had it on show. If you look up. In fact, I'm interviewing him this week. Simon Young. He's brought out one fairy book, but he's kind of the lead, if you like, of the Fairy Investigation Society within Britain, which is that it started in 1927, I think, and it's one of the oldest running fairy societies. But it's academic in the sense that they collate and collect information on fairy experiences. So he put together a really good book of lots of different experiences. He did a massive censor in this country as well, where he asked people about their experiences and has been collating that as well. I think that's available online. So if you put in probably his name and then Fairy Census UK, and that's literally anonymous encounters that people have had modern day, which are that's fascinating as well. It's mind blowing. That's really good. But yeah, whatever you're drawn to, I think is the key to it. Go with where the flow's taking you, book wise.
Yeah, that's beautiful advice too, because then it does kind of, going full circle, it just kind of gives you the power back too. And then it just like allows you to know that like maybe this person took this path of doing this kind of research, and that's what led them to the Fae. Maybe you spent a lot of time outside and then you read an article and that's what led you to there. But it is all so specific to the person, like how you find it. And I think that is great advice. So thank you so much for coming on my podcast. We already know where people can find you. I know that I'm going to have you on again, because as long as we talked, I feel like I only got like half of my questions. If that, I feel like you just gave me, like, this conversation just like totally lit me up, and it has inspired me. I think I'm going to go on the walk into that magical portal filled forest walk now, and just kind of like enjoy being there and being with the Fae. I'm sure that I will perceive them a lot today, and probably in my dreams tonight and things like that. So yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, everybody go check out your YouTube channel. I'm going to go check it out. Yeah, awesome. I don't know what else to say, but thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.